One, welcome to another live of Ken Reads, where I talk about a follower's experience that they've gone through in dating, where I share my thoughts and feelings as to what happened, provide validation where appropriate, and point out some of the attachment stuff that's potentially going on in the letter that I'm provided. Today's letter covers something unique in that it's something that I have not seen for a while, which is a very real issue of, is the person I'm dating someone who's merely just avoidant, or are they an asshole? And I think this is one of those things where it's very common for there to be a bit of an overlap where someone can be a bit of a douche and behave in avoidant ways as well too. We're going to get into that in just a hot second. Before we do, I want to let everyone know this letter's a little bit on the long side today, but I'm really excited to go through it with everyone. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to throw them in the question mark box below. I see someone here has said avoidance and assholes are the same thing. I just want to let everyone know, whilst I don't actually believe that, and I am chuckling because understandably when they are in their avoidance stage, frankly, they can be absolute assholes. So I would agree with that when they're, look, to be honest, when I think anyone's behaving from a place of, emotional immaturity, they can be painful to deal with. So I'm going to validate everyone there and say absolutely can happen. But in this case, I want to say, keen to hear everyone else's thoughts on this, but I'm really excited to discuss the story of Tom and Ellie. So Ellie's writing to me about how she met this guy, Tom. Tom and I met while walking our dogs at a local spot. It started off as just a short hello for the dogs and then turned into Tom subtly joining us, even if he wasn't even walking in the same direction as we were. Our walks could sometimes last over an hour. He was the one to ask me for my phone number and also initiated our first date. Quite early on, he admitted that he was an introvert, which was evident as he seemed quite timid and not very confident. Our situationship lasted for about 6 months. Our time consisted of meeting up on a Saturday and Sunday afternoon to walk our dogs, and we would spend time together on a Saturday night having dinner and watching a movie, mostly at my place. We got along so well together, and it was really lovely noticing the change in our dynamic when he opened up to me more and more over time. He had even admitted that he cared about me, which I know was pretty significant for him to admit. A lot of stuff going on. It all went pear-shaped after the night of his birthday, July last year. I made a little bit of a fuss, as I would usually do for someone's birthday, but he didn't really say much and didn't end up staying very long, as he said he was tired. The next day, he texted me to see if I was going walking, which he always did, but when I got to our meeting spot, he was nowhere to be seen. This was totally out of character for him. The fearful avoidant in me was triggered, and I panicked. After waiting a few moments, I started my walk. I ran into him about 40 minutes later, but as I was triggered with my own feelings of abandonment, I had completely shut down. He asked me what was wrong, and I just said that I was tired. I didn't want to say anything that I might have regretted, and I needed time to work through what I was feeling and how best to address it. So I told him I'd see him later, and I left. The next day, I text to apologize and explain what happened, but he told me he didn't see my point of view, as it didn't make any logical sense. He said that I should have just known that he was running late, and I should have had the common decency to wait. The text went back and forth, and he basically said that I should be able to know how he was feeling and what he was thinking without him having to say anything. I told him that I found reading between the lines really challenging and that I wasn't sure where I stood when he never really says much and we spend time together, but there is never really any intimacy between us. He said, I enjoy being with you. I even enjoy cuddling and kissing you, but I just don't have a real sex drive around you. It's just not there. I'm fine with that, but take some time and think about if that's something that you're okay with or not. I asked, so you're not attracted to me? He said, I think you're good looking, but no, I'm not anxious to see you naked. He completely destroyed me by saying that, and I didn't respond. For context, the week prior, I had checked in with him to see where he stood with intimacy, as I didn't want to make him uncomfortable or didn't want to be initiating something if I didn't do it for him or if he didn't want to, and his response was, depending on timing, it would be fine. For example, start of a movie, I'm not really going to feel it. Maybe if a movie's crap, absolutely I could feel it. He texts me a week later for my birthday saying, well, happy birthday. If you ever want to be in a relationship based on emotion and not be fuck buddies, let me know. I replied, thank you for wishing me a happy birthday. I ended up writing him a letter and laying everything out on the table. I used the communication techniques they tell you to use with an avoidant and completely owned my side of things. He responded, but he was so caught up in me wanting to be a fuck buddy, which wasn't the case at all. He said, I guess we have different opinions on what makes a relationship work in our 40s. I want an emotional relationship and I'm not interested in something physical. I asked if he wanted a relationship with me to get his emotional needs met and get his sexual needs met from someone else. He said, I don't have sexual needs, mate. I'm 42 fucking years old. I want a companion, but you have shown that's not you. All you want is a fuck. I tried to calm the situation down and asked him to help me understand where this was coming from and how we could sort things out. He said, we can't. We are diametrically opposed in what we want in an adult relationship. I want a companion to live my life with. You want a fuck buddy. You made it pretty clear. Not to mention the 50 texts talking about how much you want it. Anyway, I'm done. Bye. We will be returning to some of these particular messages because this is where I'm even going to be saying calling this asshole behavior is a little too gentle. I was incredibly confused as his perception was so far from reality, it blew my mind. Hell yeah, it is. I completely agree. This was the last I heard from him. I ended up changing my walking location to a place I knew he'd never been to, and about 2 months later, he showed up there with his dog. I panicked and felt sick from seeing him, so I ended up turning around to go back the way I came. There was also one day where I ended up behind his car and we were driving the same way. He ended up speeding off to get away from me. The very last time I saw him was at the beginning of this year when I returned to my usual spot as I thought enough time had passed that we could be civil with each other or simply ignore one another. I saw him a fair distance away on the opposite path, also a fair distance away. His reaction still baffles me to this day. He picked up his dog, walked to the road to cross the street and walked all the way up that street to get to the next street over to walk down and get to his car. WTF. The last months I have completely avoided anywhere he might be. I have also found back roads to use that I'm not driving anywhere near his neighborhood. Well done. It is really frustrating because he lives so close. Ouch. And I have given up walking at a really lovely spot with my dog because I just don't want to deal with seeing him or being made to feel like a piece of shit from his reactions. Fair enough. I'd love your thoughts on this as it completely fucked with my head. Also, I know that avoidance flaw fine, but did they actually point these things out to the person they're with like Tom did, or is he just an asshole? I would love to hear your thoughts on how to handle things if I would ever run into him again, which is highly likely considering how close we live to each other. I'm at the point where, although I understand certain behaviors, feel sad for what trauma he may have experienced, I also struggle with the fact that someone who knows what it feels like to be rejected or not good enough can engage in behavior that can make someone else feel that same pain and not show the slightest regret or remorse. Okay, Ellie, thank you for sharing this with me. And as someone had jumped the gun and said, this sounds more like a cluster B personality disorder, I'm going to jump in and say, I actually agree. I want to just state now that whilst as an Australian counsellor, I have no capacity to diagnose anyone with anything, I am still in my rights to be like, this is extreme. And by extreme, we are now jumping into the realm of like really nasty sort of behaviour. So let me just start out by saying, I'm really sorry that you've been through this because it does sound to me like when you were intimate with Tom and you were spending time with him on the weekends, sounds like it was great. Like, I mean, it sounds like you two had a really good amount of time together where you were intimate, close, loving, and it sounds like you really had some great bonding time together before the time of his birthday and things started to go south from there. Okay, so The thing that alarmed the shit out of me in this entire experience, and I'm going to go back to this because this was extreme, even for like, you know, normal stuff that I hear from avoidant anxious cases, or even in this case, a fearful avoidant with, you know, someone who I think leans hard more on the dismissive avoidance side. But I also just want to say, like, on the day that he had said he was going to meet up with you in the park as agreed, then he didn't show up at the time that was agreed. That is enough for anyone, regardless of attachment style, to be quite agitated and anxious about that, because that's just, you know, not okay, especially if there's no communication around that. So, you know, inconsistency there's already begun. The thing that really got to me with this was, whilst I love the fact that you owned that you were shutting down and you went to explain it to him, and by the way, I want to just say, when people say to me things like, what can avoidant attachers do to communicate what they're going through? I love what Ellie did. She knew she shut down from fear of abandonment. And even though she people pleased her way out of that to be like, I'm fine, I'm just going to go away now. I love the fact that she came back around and was like, listen, I just shut down and I didn't feel good because I didn't hear from you. And based on this letter, she did all the right things given the circumstances. So well done for you for doing that. But my God, Tom's response. So when he came back to her off the back of this apology and says, I don't see the point of, you know, I don't see your point of view. It doesn't make any logical sense. You should have just known that I was running late and you should have had the common decency to wait. Okay, fucking hell. No offense, that is a very assholey thing to say. And also to me, there's so much stuff that I could unpack from that one comment alone. That is a lot to say to someone, and it's so unfair, invalidating, very black and white thinking, and also expecting a degree of mind reading from this person. Yeah, not okay at all. And the fact that Ellie has actually done the very non-violent communication thing of being like, hey, I want to express where I came from yesterday when I didn't, you know, talk about how I was feeling shut down off the back of not, you know, seeing you when we were agreed. That's one thing. Like, well done for her for doing her side of the street. But for him to react in such a way where, to be honest, it's pretty inflammatory what he's saying. Like, you should have just known better. I'm going to be honest, this is not okay behavior at all. And like on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is like, you're being a bit of a douche, to 10 is, you're an absolute asshole right now, 11 out of 10. Like, that's a really cold thing to say, especially when you've spent such significant time with someone up until that point, and they also didn't show up when they agreed to, and they're dismissing your behavior out of hand. No, not okay. Something makes me think that here's my little interpretation of what happened here with Tom, and this is assumption. So please take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. But I almost wonder if Tom was feeling a little bit shut down around the time of his birthday and he wasn't feeling particularly good about himself. So by the time that, you know, Ellie confronted Tom with a lot of this stuff, I bet he didn't like it. I bet he didn't feel particularly good about himself. And I wouldn't be surprised if, because you came in with an understanding of what a shutdown feels like as someone with a fearful avoidant attachment style, I suspect because he focused so heavily on logic, makes me think he does not have a good relationship with his emotions. 2, there's a degree of contempt there, which makes me think I don't think that he actually feels particularly good about the fact that he has these emotional moments. And I suspect what probably happened was that you talking about this shutdown episode freaked the fuck out of him. His ego went up and he just blasted you, being like, basically making it sound like you're an irrational mess. And to me, when I hear that, it just makes me think this man projected fucking hard onto you. And the fact that he was even saying things like, you should just be able to mind read what I'm going through, makes me think, oh boy, like there's some really, really very emotionally mature stuff that's coming out there. So that makes me think this is not good sort of communication whatsoever. You ask later in the letter, is it common for avoidant attachers to verbalize their flaw finding with people? And my answer is some do. So whilst I've talked a lot consistently about what I call the inner critic, the external critic is just as alive and well. And it can be something that comes out where people, when they're activated, just start saying a whole bunch of horrible things to people. But this sort of stuff is laced with so many layers of shit that it's just like an external critic on crack. I mean, it's one thing for the average avoidant to say, I love you, but I don't love you. I want spark, but, you give me chemistry, but I'm looking for like real Hollywood chemistry. Like that's, it's still shitty behavior. But to say what he's saying, I feel like you could rip this apart and look at this from so many different lenses, and it's just, bleh, it's not good at all. And then another thing too, which I find really fascinating, is his triggered responses to you about the relationship, about like when you're trying to find out, okay, like what kind of relationship do you want? And can we talk about intimacy? It seems to me like there's to me, what I find fascinating is how triggered he gets around the topic of sex. Like, it seems to me like he enjoys enough of your time to be with you emotionally. But what really fascinates me is how absolutely like twisted he gets when you brought up the idea of being more physically intimate. And you're like, okay, so do you just want me emotionally and to see someone else physically? If this was under normal circumstances, right, where you want to maybe have like a very emotional relationship with someone and you want to have more of a sexual relationship with someone else, you can do that. But the fact that he then reacted by saying, I'm 42 years old, mate, I'm not after a fucking sexual relationship, my brain went, oh, whoa. Like, well, hello, shame. Like, just like, you got blasted by some serious shame there. And it makes me think he does not feel particularly good about, sex. And it makes me think, I wonder if he's actually a bit of, someone who goes around and actually sleeps around with a lot of people. I wonder if there's actually a lot of shame around the fact that he's just slept around with a bunch of people and engaged in a lot of casual sex, and he doesn't like that part of himself. Because to me, it just seems so irrational that, you're having what sounds like a very understandable conversation of being like, what are we doing? What kind of relationship are we trying to have here? And he just reacts like so knee-jerk in response to you trying to find out more information about what you're constructing together. And it's just sort of like he's attacking you and also making it seem like you're so immature for wanting something more than just an emotional relationship. I'm just going to say it now. This is like, this is beyond asshole sort of stuff, and it's not okay. Like, to me, this is really being like a fucking huge jerk. It's just not okay to do this to someone. And then I think that, him also declaring that, we're diametrically opposed in what we want in an adult relationship. I want a companion to live my life with. You want a fuck buddy. You made it pretty clear, not to mention the 50 texts about how much you want it. Anyway, I'm done. Bye. I'm going to cut straight to the chase. I have actually heard of many narcissists who use similar sort of language to that too. I'm not saying he is a narc. I can't make that conclusion, but just that sort of like, I want to control the conversation. I want to control what we are. I want to control, where we stand in things. I want to control who gets the last line in our discussion of things. I need to control how I feel in relation to you. My brain goes, oh, like, this is like, again, this is a very narcissistic side of Tom. Does not mean he necessarily has narcissistic personality disorder, but just that whole need to have such violent control verbally over this and to dictate what the terms are, insecurity to the nines in this sort of commentary. He's, unilaterally deciding what's going on between the two of you. He's coming at this from such a haughty sort of style of being like, I'm deciding what's best for us, and also not even involving you in the decision-making of this entire process and shutting down the conversation with such an immature bye. It's almost missing the LOL piece at the very end there as well too. So I just want to say that this is very alarming stuff. And now I have to kind of talk to you, Ellie, and say, you absolutely didn't deserve what you went through. This is horrific. And you also mentioned too, like, you're like, okay, what should I do if I ever, run into this person again? I can't give you advice, but if it were me, I'd keep up what you're doing if you can. And if you do bump into him again, I'd be like, I'd have very clear boundaries with yourself where it's like, if I see him again, I know that I'm not going to engage with him because he's obviously engaged in very hurtful behavior. I don't think you need to go as far as like, moving out of town or going to somewhere new to avoid him completely. But when I hear this, my brain just goes, oh, yuck. Like this is like when you get close to a guy like this, you're going to get this very prickly asshole sort of side out of him. And it's just not okay. So there's not much more I could add to that other than to say, I'm really sorry that you've gone through this. There is one thing I want to point out though, and this is more on the accountability side of things. And I guess the thing that sort of does come to my mind, and this is the therapist in me speaking, is it does make me interested that, this dynamic was happening and, I feel like you behaved exceptionally well given the circumstances, but there is something here which makes me wonder. I almost feel like I'm wondering if you may have, tried, like a part of you tried to make this work, even though there was a lot of glaring stuff that was coming out towards the end of like, this is just not okay. So even though I want to make it very clear, you do not deserve what happened, I'm just saying, if you find that there's been a pattern of people who have behaved like this with you, who act like assholes, that's when I'd be like, I'd question whether that's just a coincidence, because sometimes I see with clients, they've dated people who actually behave very similarly in a way where I'm like, oh, that could be something that is a subconscious thing that's going on. And that could be a thing of like, you may have grown up with people who actually behave in similar ways. If it was a freak sort of accident that happened, look, that happens as well too. Not everyone is drawn to people who are subconsciously behaving in ways that are familiar to us that we've grown up in childhood. But something about this just makes me feel like I think you did an excellent job of trying to work on this to such a degree that makes me wonder, was there a little bit of fawning going on at times as well too with this one? But otherwise, I think you handled this like a champ. You really did such a great job working through your attachment style stuff in terms of being like, I shut down, let me communicate it. But you are not working with a team player. Jesus Christ. By the way, before I go to Q&A, if anyone has any commentary they want to share with regards to Tom and Ellie's case, feel free to throw it in the chat. I'll be more than happy to share my 2 cents and also bounce back with people. But I did see some individuals, throwing their thoughts and feelings around with this one, and it's great. To answer the question, is this avoidant or arsehole? I want to say, look, generally speaking, I don't think avoidants are actually assholes. I really don't. I think generally they can actually be quite lovely people. But when that part of them comes out, fuck me. It's like dealing with an absolute nightmare. And yeah, absolutely, they can be assholes. So when I sort of, hear that kind of language and how intense it is, like just yuck. Like, just no. Just no. Just yuck, no. Not okay sort of stuff. I can see someone here says, Tom appears to have given up on sex at 42. What the F, Tom? I completely agree with you, but it seems to me more like it's coming from a place of shame to me, like when he makes those comments. Like, to me, it sort of makes me think, I wouldn't be surprised if he actually bounced around and did some casual sex off the back of this experience just to feel better about himself, because that does happen quite a lot with these sort of cases. So, yeah. It is... Sorry, I just noticed someone here. Avoidants aren't robots driven by some external forces. Total lack of empathy during discard is being an arsehole in its deepest meaning. They could help themselves if they wanted, but they choose not to. Yeah, I have to say, like, I think in a lot of cases there is truth to that. So, yeah, I think you've got a point. But I want to make it clear that if you're to all avoidants who might be listening to this video and thinking, well, I don't behave like that, totally fair. Not every one of you behaves that way. But when you're in like that severe sort of range and you're behaving like that, frankly, you're being abusive. So that's why I just want to make it very clear that that kind of behavior is not okay in my books. I don't know what other people have grown up with, and that's to each their own, but I want to just make it very clear that if you're someone who's reacting in such a, dysregulated way over just having a conversation about what kind of relationship you're constructing, you really need a lot of help. Someone here says, how do you give humanity to someone like Tom, or do you? This is such a great question. So I think what Ellie was doing was actually on point, where she's saying things like, look, on one hand, to be the person you are who reacts so intensely around intimacy, you weren't born like that, most likely. On one hand, you probably have gone through some terrible stuff. And it's, on one hand, I am sorry that you've gone through this to be someone who obviously has a degree of insensitivity to these sort of things and insecurity. And, connecting line, that is not an excuse to put up with that kind of behavior. Frankly, your backstory is not an excuse for this sort of stuff. Sure, it can help explain it. And sometimes those explanations are good to understand sort of where this is coming from so we don't personalize it. But that's where it ends there. Because at the end of the day, we all got baggage. We all have, our own shit that we need to deal with. Some people have, a duffel bag. Other people have an entire cargo container. Doesn't matter. The point is, it's got our name on it and we need to take accountability and responsibility for it instead of beating people over the head with our stuff without taking accountability for what we're doing. So that's my stance on a lot of this sort of stuff. You don't have to share my thoughts and feelings on this as a general audience, so it's entirely up to you. I'm going to go back to some of these points that have been thrown into the chat, then I'll move into Q&A. Question, this is specifically to dismissive avoidance. How do you draw the line between avoidance and narcissism? I believe my ex was a covert narc, and I've discussed this with my psych. This is a hard question to answer because, there are so many dimensions of narcissism that also then need to overlap with an individual who has a fear of intimacy. So the thing is that's really tricky is on the extreme end of avoidant attachment, it does dwell into realms of narcissism. So what makes that sort of that jump into we are now firmly in NPD land is when there'd be a lot of other stuff going on too. At the covert range, you'd be dealing with someone who's just the perpetual victim complaining about life and how every opportunity has passed them. So they're really dwelling in that victimhood and making everyone else feel like an absolute piece of shit to be around them. And maybe getting on really well with other people who are just abusive, but treating you like crap when you're really good to this person. It might be someone who has a chronic habit of gaslighting, being, offensive rather than merely just defensive. Someone who has had a history of interpersonal issues that are outside of just this relationship where it being around them is like being in a black hole where you just feel like you're drowning in their depression and they're not doing anything about it. They keep making excuses for why they are and not wanting to take any accountability for who they are. They're someone who also exhibits a lot of the criteria that you would see in the DSM-5. That's sort of the stuff that we'd be looking for. Lots of devil in the detail sort of stuff. If it's someone who's merely just a dismissive avoidant, I mean, sure, DAs are definitely capable of being judgy at times, hypervigilant. They can certainly cheat and gaslight from time to time too, but we'd be looking at what's the frequency? How's this sort of behavior coming out? Because if it's just around the fear of intimacy piece, then it's easy to be we're dealing with just someone who probably is more of a dismissive avoidant. Just to kind of help you understand it from my perspective, when I'm working with a client and I'm listening to their story of how they're interacting with someone, and then as we sort of hear multiple stuff that comes up over and over and over again, that's when it's the writing's starting to become very visible on the wall. So once upon a time, I had someone I was working with where at first we were this just sounds like a case of someone who's clearly dismissive avoidant. But then there became an escalation where there was things the partner was calling, my client an idiot in the street and telling them how fucking awful they were. They were also, when my client was asking their partner, hey, can you help me just get some water from the fridge? They'd be go get it yourself. And anytime that they would try and bring this attention to their partner would just sort of break down into tears and be I know I'm like this, I need to change, I don't know how to change. And they would never do anything about it. They just keep complaining about it over and over and over again. And there was also a history of similar sort of style of relating in the family as well too. And there was a lot of isolation. There was a lot of not trying to involve my client in the relationship as well too. There was also language barrier as well, which was often capitalized against my client as well. It was the sort of stuff where there was definitely lines of covert narcissism meets dismissive avoidant attachment style. And that's when it was okay, we're now in very, very murky territory. But at the end of the day, as my client figured out for themselves, it didn't feel particularly good to be on the receiving end of this. And they made a call to get out. But what was really fascinating about what happened with the breakup was, and this is very classically sort of narcissistic stuff, is once the breakup occurred, their partner did a lot of revenge sex and also did a lot of like very sabotagey behavior with their home that they were trying to sell to get back at my client. So that's when like that element of revenge was also there, that I was like, DAs wouldn't give a shit about just revenge in general. Like, they're not the kind of person who engages in trying to make their ex or their partner suffer. That's sort of in the realm of someone who's like really got a lot of internal stuff that's going on that they're not getting better. So it's, when you ask a question like this, I want to make it very clear that it can be very hard, to definitively be like, there are this, there are that. The attachment style stuff is actually a lot easier because you're like, okay, there's clearly a fear of intimacy going on here for such a big reaction to getting close. But narcissism, you need a few more extra pieces to the puzzle to be like, now I'm seeing stuff that's like conjoined and it's gross. So that's how I would sort of explain what's going on from my eyes when I hear a lot of this stuff. And like I said, even though I can't diagnose anyone, I can still be like, that we are heading well in the direction of someone who's being a bully, abusive, and engaging in narcissistic patterns of behavior. So that's how I say it. I've got someone here that I think is in reference to the story that I shared of Ellie and Tom. Any type of rage text where you feel like you don't know what's happening is always a red flag to me. He's being a bully and using bad language where Ellie is trying to discuss things. I couldn't agree more. And I love that you've defined that. I actually think he's a complete bully. I think that I think it's just so unfair what he was doing to Ellie, and I think that it was just not okay that he wasn't even just being willing to discuss things out, like ironically for someone who wanted to take things to a very logical level, he himself seemed to be coming at this from a very irrational place. So ha ha ha, you may try and be the most intelligent, rational person on the planet, but even you will never be able to outrun dysregulation and an emotional nervous system that wants to control things. So yeah, all right, I'm just going to see if there's anything else with regards to this story. I said, so what boundaries should be communicated to a person like Tom? Could you give us a couple of examples of what to say? Sure. I think the first one that I would actually say, now if this was me, if I was being spoken to like that, with what I'm going through, I would say to someone, listen, I like you, but if I will not be spoken to in this particular way, because to me, this feels incredibly disrespectful given what we're trying to work on. So I'm just going to ask, is it okay if we try and work on this, maybe another day when we can both actually be quite civil about it? Because I don't want to invest and actually create something with someone where I'm being made to feel as though, I'm somehow asking for something that I haven't, and also being made to feel like I'm some immature person when what I'm asking for is actually very reasonable in a relationship. That's probably what I would do, just to sort of try and have to escalate that to a more civil place. And it might sound a little bit in the realm of ultimatum sort of stuff, and you bet it is, because I will not tolerate being spoken to in that particular way. I won't leave them just yet, but I'll be like, I'm warning you that that behavior is not okay. And it's actually more for myself to say that, because for me at that particular point in time, I need to actually say that for me to mentally be like, yeah, this isn't actually okay behavior. So that way, if it continues, which it likely will, I at least can be like, okay, I said my piece, I'm out. And the reason I do that is because, as I think a lot of you will understand, it's very hard when you're not someone who's going through a shutdown episode with an avoidant, meaning if you're not deactivating due to fear of intimacy, our feelings for someone gradually shift over time. And so it's important that for your brain, you actually express and flag these extreme moments with someone that you're interacting with, because what it does from like a cognitive perspective is the more you speak up for it, it actually clicks that over into your brain to be like, oh yeah, now I can actually assess the situation for what it is. We've now taken a turn for the worst, and I need to think about my options here, because this is not sort of okay sort of stuff. And so it's really just allowing your brain to do like almost like a refresh of the situation, being like, we have new information here. This person's suddenly engaging in some whack behavior, and I need to now think about how that's having an impact on me. So that's where I see the value in speaking it out before then maybe going to the next step, which is I'm not going to be spoken to like this. You know, look, I have loved getting to know you, and I would have loved to have continued, you know, engaging with you in a relationship, but I'm choosing not to engage with you now. And then back away. I would block in this case because this person has demonstrated a degree of like verbal violence that I'm just like, oh no, no. And it's also suggesting a lot of control. So normally I wouldn't be so rapid on being like, let's block this person. But for me, and bear in mind, this is what I would do. Not everyone has to follow me, but I am not going to put up with that shit. I'd be like, you're out. Adios. It was fun. I will grieve. I will do my thing, but I'm not dealing with this shit. And if I'm in a situation where I have to encounter someone like Tom again, I probably have to make some mental boundaries for myself, being like, okay, if I see him, I just need to move into a different area. I need to just go into different spots. I might need to look for a different dog park. Frustrating, but it is, you know, it is what it is. Because people like that, when you're brushing against them in, you know, everyday life, it's not fun. And also some people can hold a grudge for a long time. And that's where, again, I go into, this is like really sort of shitty behavior from Tom's side. So anyways, let's take a look. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else here that I want to communicate on with regards to Tom and Ellie's case. Let's see if there's anything else here that I want to talk about. Someone here says he fits Davo, that's for sure. So anyone who doesn't know what that means, that's deny, attack, reverse the victim and the offender. That's a great term for actually what's going on. It's a subtler version of Davo, but it absolutely is a form of Davo in this case. Because Davo has been used to describe coercive relationships where coercive control is involved. And for those that may not be sure of what that is, it's basically any form of like psychological abuse where the person is using verbal, emotional, and or physical violence to control a relationship. And even though this person wasn't engaging in anything physical, Tom was definitely leading into that because rather than owning his own insecurities, he threw them back onto Ellie by denying that, you know, basically there was an issue in the first place, attacking her for not simply understanding what she was, you know, attacking her for not understanding what he was experiencing. And he reversed the victim and offender because he made it seem like I'm the one who was misunderstood rather than you were fucking late and didn't communicate it to me and now you're attacking me. So I'd say absolutely Davo. Let's see, is there anything else here that someone wanted to say about this case? Because I think I'm about to go to Q&A. I'm going to Q&A. All right. I'm going to do my best to work through these because your boy needs to do exercise after this. Okay. Is it an avoidant trait to not like gifts? I was told him it made him uncomfortable. Okay, yes, it can be, and I'll explain why. Someone actually asked me recently why some avoidants get uncomfortable around kindness, because many avoidants are not comfortable with receiving love from other people. For them, love has often been characterized by adversity, neglect, basically man up, regardless of whether you're a man, woman, or non-binary person, and just don't show your feelings. So a lot of them, even though consciously they may know better that love is kindness, warmth, acceptance, subconsciously that's not what they're used to. Similarly, if you're someone who ever uses a phrase like I love myself, an affirmation, and it doesn't feel right to you, like something goes, no I fucking don't, I hate myself, that's a great example of how it feels for an avoidant to receive love from another person. They're not used to it. They often feel quite discombobulated by it because it goes against their own feelings of low self-worth. They think they're a piece of shit. They have big core wounds around being defective and being a bad person. Many of them do not feel worthy of receiving love. So that's why when I read that, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, that's very common. But I want to make it clear that this is a trait that is exhibited across insecure attachers, but I see it being very, very, very acutely obvious with avoidant attachers, both dismissive and fearfuls. Okay, next question. My avoidant just got out of his rebound relationship but hasn't reached out to me at all. I know he may not, but would it be a bad idea for me to reach out? He was with his rebound for a year right after our breakup. I mean, I don't see any reason as to why you can't. I mean, if you're going to reach out, I hope you have a good intention in mind, because the only reason I would reach out is to say my 2 cents of being like, hey, didn't love how I was treated, but I wish you all the best. Depends on what you want to get out of it. I don't think, if you're looking to get back with them for, another chance to see if you can make things work. I mean, you can. Good luck to you because you're welcome to, but just want to say, it's probably not a good thing to do just at this particular point in time. I wouldn't advise it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. Avoidant ex discard in January. I'm sorry to hear that. She drinks to numb herself, talked for the first time in July and insulted me for not talking to her. Recently blocked to move on. This person won't come back to me, right? Maybe not. I'm assuming you blocked them to move on, in which case, well done. But I want to say one thing in that sentence just made me think, I doubt it, and I'll tell you why. They said to you that they insulted you for not talking to them, since they discarded you in January. It makes me think we're dealing with someone who's an anxious leaning, fearful avoidant, meaning it's funny, I did a video on this today. I suspect for this person, they wanted you to chase them and actually to give them that validation. So the fact that you didn't, even though she discarded you, I think made her feel like a piece of shit and she didn't like that, even though she was the architect of her own pain in that situation. So I'd say in that case, will they come back? I'd say actually there's probably a greater likelihood that she might come back if she feels particularly inclined. But I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that to you to give you false hope. I'm saying that's because, when someone is operating out of their wounding, their abandonment fears, there is a higher likelihood that when they're lonely and starved for connection, they absolutely could reach back out. So just saying, it could happen. Another person here says, should I break no contact with the fearful avoidant to tell her my lines of communication are open? No. I don't usually give advice, but why? I mean, in that particular example, I'm sort of thinking, what would be the benefit of that? I understand that with the last example that I just gave, obviously that fearful avoidant seemingly wanted their ex, who they dumped, to reach back out to them. But I'm thinking, what benefit would it be to let them know the lines of communication are open? I'd need to know the context of the situation. Generally speaking, again, I don't usually give advice, but in this case, I don't know why a person would want to do that. Unless, again, it would depend on what happened with you and your fearful avoidant ex. Is this someone that's healthy for you? I know that you may want them back and you may want to work on that. I get that. And I'm not here to shame you for that. But generally speaking, it's better for them to come back on their own terms than to play into the drama that they create in these contexts. Again, this is for a very specific kind of avoidant attacher. We're talking anxious leaning, fearful avoidance, if that's what you've experienced. But not every FA behaves that way. I'd say that it's probably best to leave this on their own terms, and if they want to reach back out, believe me, they will. Nothing will stop them. They're very good at reaching out via whatever means they have to get in contact with you. How to break the pattern of attracting avoidance. It sucks. Okay. This is going to be a topic that I'm going to do for a live in the future because it needs a lot of unpacking. Short answer is, unfortunately, in this day and age, we do have a large number of people who have different insecure attachment styles. It is what it is. So that's one aspect. 2, due to conditioning, culture, environments, trauma, there is going to be obviously a lot of normalizing and enabling for people who have insecure attachment styles. So there are a lot more people who are likely to have fearful and or dismissive avoidant attachment style. So it means there is a high likelihood of meeting them. Then there's the next piece, which is the piece that not a lot of people love hearing about, but I'm going to say it. You might be drawn to these people for a variety of reasons. And that's where I need to have a much longer conversation with everyone involved and explain what that means. Subconsciously, you could have something inside of you, many parts of you, in fact, that are not only drawn to these kind of people, but also attracts these people. To break it down in a somewhat reductive example, when we look at the pathology of abusers and people who run very culty sort of systems like MLMs, people are very selective of the targets that they go for because they know that energetically, their disposition, they're the kind of fit that they want for themselves in order to feel safe. So, multi-level marketing schemes, pyramid schemes, might go for people, cults as well, who are actually very reasonable human beings who are also highly, show high traits of optimism, agreeableness, empathy, because people who score high on those traits are idealistic at times. They want a better world. They want to do anything to make something better. And so they may be a good fit for the more, let's just say, perverse inclinations of these sort of systems. Abusers may go for certain targets, not consciously, but actually they just know based on the way someone's behaving, the way that they show up, that they're like, oh yeah, this is someone who I know I can connect with, I can whelm, I can really get close to, because that energy is something that I can feed off, and I can get, I can be with someone who I know I can control. Again, this may not be a conscious thought, but the point is that the way we show up in our energy, our disposition, our body language, the way we talk can all play a role in how we attract and are also maybe attracted to people who may not at times be good for us. And the work on fixing that is also working through a lot of that trapped emotion inside of us that may cause us to show up in particular ways. And so that's, again, a conversation that I want to have in depth because it's quite complicated. And short answer is a lot of inner work and healing is required. Ideally therapy, other modalities if they work for you, but it's important to think about with that. I can see someone here has asked, when I talk about an accountability team, what do I mean by that? Okay, so I think this might be referring to yesterday's video where I was asked the question, how do I know it's safe to let an avoidant attacher back into my life? And I said, well, ideally they'd have an accountability team. So when I say accountability team, I'm using that term kind of loosely. I basically mean having friends who will gently call someone out when they're acting out. Meaning that, if, for instance, if I see one of my mates and they trust me to do this and it's agreed that we'll do this, where I can see my mate is behaving in a way which is destructive to them and they're okay with me being like, hey, do you think you're maybe doing that thing again? That's what I mean by accountability. And it doesn't have to just be friends. It could be a therapist, a 12-step recovery team, fellow people who are part of that program. It's really about having people who hold you to the tenets of the program you're on, the work you're doing on yourself, who can gently be like, do you think maybe you're coming from a place of X, Y, Z? Rather than people who just give you confirmation bias being like, you're so right. If you're feeling this way, clearly they're not the one for you. It's really about having people who know you, who you feel safe and you trust, and aren't just yes men, women, people who just validate everything you say without actually understanding what the underlying stuff is that might be motivating you in this way. It can be really helpful for avoidant attachers to actually have people who call them out being like, did you just shut down? I think you just shut down. You've done this before with other people, because if they're gentle with the avoidant friend or client, it can actually be really good for them to be like, oh yeah, shit, I did that thing again. And that can be really helpful for the avoidant attacher to go back and be like, I fucked up. I shut down. I'm so sorry about what I said. Can we talk about this? My team have absolutely got me covered. I want to work on this with you. So that's sort of what I meant by it's good to have an accountability team. It doesn't literally need to be something clad in contracts or in writing. It's just more of make sure you have good friends around you who really can, who have your back, essentially. All right, a few more and then I'm going to bounce. Let's see. My girlfriend and I have been through family therapy. If she's avoidant, I'm anxious. She has a toddler, and I fear her avoidance has negatively impacted her over the last 3 years that we've been together. Any tips? I'm going to say I can't really give you tips off the back of that question. Great question, by the way, only because I'm not a co-parenting expert. I do have team members who are. If you actually look at Sydney LaFleur's content, she could easily answer that one because she's better at that sort of stuff than I am. And she's a part of my, if you go to my booking page, you can reach out to her, even though she's probably accepting clients on her page. But point is, check with Sydney. You can easily find her on my website. She's part of the team there. Otherwise, I frequently refer to her as well. All right, I'm going to do 2 more. Curious if you have any comments on the movie It Ends With Us or the PR to go see it. Okay, so I actually read the book It Ends With Us last year and I loved it. And I know there was a lot of controversy around this book. So I don't know if anyone's actually read this book, but It Ends With Us is great. So for me at least, I really enjoyed it. It's a romance novel. Well, it's marketed as a romance novel, and that's where the controversy started because it's actually about domestic violence. And It's a really, really, really good book, in my opinion, for the reason that it does such a good job of illustrating the naive optimism and hope of when you're with someone who you fall madly in love with, like a romantic fairy tale, before it turns into an absolute nightmare. And the thing I love about that book is that it really does such a great job of illustrating a love, like a trauma bond, where you have equal parts romance and romantic idealizing, infatuation, and real love, combined with like all these unhealthy things that go on in the relationship. And I think the guy's name is Ryle and Lily is the main character. So I'm going to go into spoiler territory here. So if anyone is about to go and see It Ends With Us, opt out now, because I'm about to go into like heavy spoilers. If you want to read the book, opt out now, because I'm just about to spoil a lot of stuff. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In the book, Ryle, who's the domestic abuser, is sort of portrayed in this very charming, cavalier way. And actually, for me, I was getting red flag vibes from the very first chapter where, you know, this guy sort of idealizes Lily, the main character. And even as they're talking, he almost exclusively talks about himself and asks almost very superficial questions to get to know her. But Lily, who's gone through a history of DVA-related stuff from her own background, it's interesting how, you know, she's very vulnerable to a lot of the love bombing that actually happens in the early stages of this relationship. And then it quickly escalates into an absolute nightmare situation for her. But long story short, so just ending the spoiler part there, love the book, think it's fabulous. I got through it in like 2 days. It was a really good read. I'm a sucker for, you know, what I call jelly bean books, like romance novels. I do like other genres a lot too, but sometimes my brain just wants to be switched off and I enjoy reading like sometimes very trashy stuff every now and then, but that was a good read. So yeah, if anyone's interested, highly recommend it. I heard the movie was, to be honest, I only looked at like the Rotten Tomatoes scoring and stuff like that. The movie itself, you know, didn't appeal to me as something that I was desperate to go and see, but you know, people should definitely check it out of their own free will. So see what you think. All right, one more question, then I'm going to bounce. Do avoidants get defensive when you catch them out on something they are doing wrong? Yeah, they can. Absolutely they can. And the reason goes back to their core wound of, I am a bad person. I am defective. The minute you call them out on something that they're doing wrong, they'll probably say things like, they might feel like, oh, I can never do anything right. I'm never good enough. I can't meet your needs. I'm hopeless at this. Clearly, we shouldn't be together. If you're feeling this way, I'm only hurting you. Can't you see it's a foregone conclusion that we can't work on this? Very sensitive to feedback and very sensitive to any form of like accountability with regards to this stuff. So it's very common for them to be very triggered when you call them out on something, even if you're doing it in a very gentle way, like a lot of non-violent communication using like the, hey, I noticed you're doing X, Y, Z, or I feel that when this happens, I feel X, Y, Z, or A, B, C. That triggers the shit out of a lot of them because they can't handle it. You know, a lot of them have really tried to be hard perfectionists. Get why, totally understand it. But makes building a relationship damn hard when you can't have a partner who's able to just stop shame spiraling and taking everything so personally. But, you know, it is what it is. It's really hard. All right, everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you to Ellie for submitting such a fantastic example of a letter. I just want to say I fucking loved your letter. I also want to say well done in your, like the way you navigated this situation. I thought the way you explained your shutdown as a fearful avoidant was chef kiss. And I'm sorry that Tom, I'm just going to say, was an absolute asshole to you, because there are some things where I'll be like, oh yeah, that's avoidant attachment. But I got to tell you, that was like, you know, such shitty behavior from his side. So not okay. You will be able to catch this as a replay. I hope that, you know, anyone who's interested goes and checks this out at your own time. Lastly, I can see someone here has said, can I watch this live elsewhere? I am in the works of looking to try and put some of this stuff, like occasionally these videos go on YouTube, which is probably the more preferable platform for a lot of people. The trouble is that because most of my audience lives on Instagram, it's one of those things where it's like, do I move to YouTube and try and get everyone to convert to go over there just so that way I can be on there as well too for the convenience of everyone? And or do I maybe make this into a podcast? I have been thinking about doing a podcast, but I'm sort of just waiting on a few things to sort themselves out from our side because there's a bit of admin going on to facilitate that. But yeah, I'm continuing to do the letter reading for now, as you know, just for now. And then I will make it a feature where people, if they want to submit their letters to me, can do so from about September onwards, and I'll advertise that as well too. Someone here has mentioned Patreon. I've thought about it as well too. I've got to think about whether I want to do that. It's just the thought of like, basically being like, hey, are people willing to basically move to a different platform to get more out of my time and energy? Because if they do, more than happy to, see if it's going to be something that's a good fit. But I know the cost of transition can mean some people are just like, they'll opt out. And I guess it is what it is. And that's my marketing brain talking, only because been around the yard a few times with this sort of stuff. So I'm just sort of like, it's got to work for me, got to work for you, got to be, a relationship of sorts. Anyways, everybody, thank you. It's been fun. I will catch you guys around next week for another live, doing another Ken Reads. I love doing these discussions. And I hope that you all have a fabulous day wherever you may be.